Welcome to the Mental Health Bootcamp Podcast.
Woo!
Woo.
It's just me. All right.
This is the podcast where 4 psychotherapists, 3 of us Canadian, 1 of us American, serve you cutting-edge mental health knowledge. I am Dr. Ryan Howes, a psychologist from Pasadena, California.
And I am Brooke Lewis, a registered clinical counselor from the Vancouver, Canada area.
And I'm Joanna Boyd, also a registered clinical counselor from the Vancouver area.
And I'm Chris Boyd, psychotherapist for the Vancouver area and Joanna's brother.
Right on. We nailed it this week. We don't always nail it, but we nailed it this week.
It's true.
We've kept the same order for a long time. Maybe it's time to switch it up.
Yeah,
That's a good idea.
Next time, tune in next time for a switch up of our introduction.
Yeah, it's a lot of pressure being the first Canadian.
You really switch it up each time in terms of like what you say, where do we live? I'm like, where are we going to live this time?
So I get thrown off. I get like a little spooked and then something just comes out.
Well,
Are we talking stage fright tonight? Maybe performance anxiety? That's a good topic for us, right? It's just so much pressure putting on this every. I don't know. I feel so anxious before we do this every time.
Sure. Well, I guess we'll find out in a little bit. In a smidgen.
I'm just kidding. I don't really feel that anxious. This is just fun. 4 friends talking mental health. That's what we do. This is episode 42.
Wow.
It's a lot.
Yeah. So what day was our first episode? Like, so obviously I could count this out.
I think it was in the summer.
Well, it was in the summer. I can tell you in a second here. That was July 19th.
Okay, there we go. Because the first episode, Chris and I were actually sitting outside on my
Me too.
Euros, yeah, that's right. And there was like the plane and stuff, but it was bright enough that we could sit outside for the whole episode. So that's happening soon.
Oh, maybe I wasn't in my own place, but yeah, the anniversary's coming up.
That's right. Stay tuned for our big anniversary plans on July 19th.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, Joanna, I think it was when you were up here on the deck as well. Yeah, I think that was the 2nd or 3rd, but
yeah, I was either. Anyways, yeah, that was when we were contemplating whether or not to even do it, and Ryan, you were the kind of let's try it out.
And we had to do a practice run with the recording ourselves because we were all thrown off. Everyone just stopped talking.
We're like, hello.
Now we are wise veterans at this, doing it for a long time. And gosh, we're just hitting our stride. We're just getting started. There's so many topics to cover.
Yeah.
So many things to discuss in mental health.
It's true.
We'll be doing our vote for your favorite mental health boot camp episode coming up here pretty soon. The sweepstakes.
We should do it at the 1 year.
We'll do it the 1 year, sure.
Or leading up to the 1 year so we can announce it at the 1 year.
Yeah, there we go. Yes, we'll do that.
That's good. I'll have to bake a cake.
We'll have to bake a cake. We'll have to have more costumes. I think
Party favors?
Oh, costumes. Yes.
When we dress up a little bit, that's what gets people to watch the YouTube channel, you know?
Oh.
Like our Halloweens and our holidays and all of those things. Those were kind of fun.
I should start actually planning some outfits then. Typically by Thursday night, I'm just not there. It's the case of the Thursday. So there's downgrading in the attire opposed to upgrading in the attire.
Aha. So we'd get a swankier Brooke on Monday morning?
Or Tuesday afternoon, maybe. Monday morning might look a little bit rough too.
Understandable. Hitting your stride on Tuesday afternoon.
Yeah, exactly.
That's about right. Yeah. Well, I happen to really like Thursday nights because it's like, okay, just about done with the week, almost there. Feels kind of good. Feels like you're kind of on the down slope here and ready to slide into the weekend.
Yeah, the weekend warm up.
Yes.
It is kind of weekend warm up. Yeah. Okay. Well, we've bantered. Let's just dive right in, everybody. Let's get to our big topic of the evening.
Let's do it.
Okay.
Who's
so
serving it up tonight?
I think I'm up. So I'm going to text you.
Okay, this is the ambush. Chris knows the topic. The three of us, the rest of us do not. So here it comes, hopefully.
Okay, here it
Chris can
comes.
follow up from toxic masculinity. Let's see. Okay, here we go. All right, here we go. Ooh,
Did he redeem himself?
this is okay. If you're needing a pick me up on Thursday night, here we go. All right, everybody. How do you support a family member or friend who is feeling suicidal? Or how do you respond to these suicidal feelings and thoughts if you are experiencing them yourself?
Really? That's what we're doing?
That's what we're doing.
Really, really.
Remember we were just talking about like how there's so much daylight and the flowers are blooming.
Well,
a bit there, but that's okay.
let's put on your clinician hat here, Brooke. We got a little bit of work to do here. This is a very important topic, very timely and important topic.
Oh, look at this.
David's here.
We have a guest.
Good evening.
Hey!
So this is David Lindskoog.
Hello.
He is a therapist and also in the Vancouver area. And guess what? This is kind of one of his areas of specialty. So he actually oversees the curriculum and facilitation of the suicide prevention education programming at the Health and Counseling Services at Simon Fraser University. That was a mouthful. This is kind of his domain.
Wow. This is a true ambush, David. I've never met you. My name's Ryan. It's great to meet you.
Yeah, no, it's wonderful to be here. Thank you, Chris, for the invitation. That's obviously an important topic, but this is just such a fun opportunity to chat with you all.
Oh, this is so good.
This is fantastic.
You've already made my night. This is great.
Yeah, so David listened to all 44 podcasts before coming on tonight.
Yeah. Yeah, no, and the last one, I think you even name dropped me last episode, Chris.
You really actually listened to them all.
You listened to a few of them.
Maybe, last week's.
Maybe just okay. Well, still, thanks for listening. Thanks for the support.
I'm a forever listener now.
Right.
Yeah, I think
on.
you listened to last week for sure, and I think you listened to Joe Dilly's.
Yeah.
And then he was really excited to listen to Toxic Masculinity.
That's actually on the top of my list. Yeah, I haven't got to it yet, but
Do it.
I hear you're all really proud of it.
Yeah, no. So Ryan, to connect the dots, David's the one that Dungeons and Dragons, but with emotions.
Oh yeah, that's
David's
right.
program. Yeah.
Oh, that's amazing.
So if you ever decide to talk about therapeutically applied role-playing games, then there are lots of people. There is actually lots of people that you can talk to, but I would definitely listen to that one.
Well, you'd be the guest star, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Again.
Yeah.
Oh wow. So honored to have you. David, since I don't know, I mean, Chris gave you a nice introduction. Tell me a little bit more about what you do. What's your practice and field of focus and all that, other than the role-playing games, which is great.
Sure. Yeah. Well, it's a fun mix. So, I currently am working primarily with university students, as I work in one of the large universities here in the Vancouver area as a counselor, and that's been a few years. And then actually before that, I was in the area of youth suicide prevention and intervention. So really developed quite a passion and just learned a lot about, the application of all that and some of the really cool research that's being done. So yeah, that's been one of the things that's followed me for sure. Once people figure out that, you've worked with a lot of those types of clients, you kind of become the guy who gets a lot of them on their caseload. But this is something that obviously every one of us work with. So Yeah, and then I have a small private practice here in the Lower Mainland too.
Right on. Well, great. You're the guy to talk to then about this. This is great. Well, cool. I guess Chris dropped this question on us, and I'm so glad you're here because I probably would have stumbled around a little bit. But so the questions were: how do you support a family member or friend who's feeling suicidal, or how do you respond to these suicidal feelings and thoughts if you're experiencing them yourself? So, I guess let's dive in, right?
Yeah, and I'm going to make it a mission to make you all say the word suicide as many times as we possibly can. That's so awkward, isn't it? Sometimes, even for us as clinicians, but I think that's really a conversation that just needs to happen more.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know. What do you all think?
Well, first off, David, I agree with you completely that we need to say the word suicide more often. I do find myself sometimes in sessions saying, do you have thoughts of harming yourself? And then I catch myself and say, are you having suicidal thoughts? Just to normalize that phrase and to be so direct and clear about it and make it okay for the other person to talk about. And so in some regards, the part of the answer to the first question, I think, is using the appropriate language in supporting the other person, so that I feel like it's such a scary thing, especially for parents and loved ones, if a family member is feeling suicidal. And often there's so many feelings of helplessness from that person, of not knowing what to do and not wanting to make it worse. And
I find sometimes I differentiate. Sometimes in session I'll ask, are you having thoughts of harming yourself? And I do, like you, Brooke, catch myself. But I also think when I ask about that, I'm asking also about self-harm, because some people have thoughts of self-harming and not the intention for suicide. So I try to differentiate and try to check in for self-harm behaviors versus actually wanting to, take their own life. So it's, I try to ask if I ever worry. And I'll even say, I'm going to the uncomfortable place. I want to just say it as it is. The one thing that comes to mind is some people are worried that if they ask about suicide, that they're going to put the idea in their loved one's head, or, oh, if I bring it up, or if I ask my kid, maybe they'll start, will that lead them down that way? And I feel like that's a myth. I don't think that tends to be the case at all. So I think there's a lot of different myths to maybe correct or to demystify, for sure.
Go ahead, Ryan. Yeah.
I was just going to say, I had the pleasure of speaking with Stacy Friedenthal, who's a researcher on suicidality at University of Denver. And she actually studied whether or not, I don't know if she studied it or if she just told me about a study, one or the other, but talked about how clinicians tend to not want to even mention the word with their clients out of fear that it will plant the thought in their head that they might, maybe that will cause them to think about suicide, cause the client to think about suicide. And that's just not the case. It just doesn't pan out. Like, if you just say the word, like you guys are saying, normalize it. Let's just be able to talk about it openly. Harming yourself and suicidality are not the same thing, and they're not coming from the same place. So if you're going to be direct about it, then just say the words, Yeah,
it's obviously important to know exactly what information you're getting too. And I think we think about this in a professional context. And it's easy to do that. Like I know I put on my therapist hat, and, I can ask every single person I meet with in the course of my day, like, hey, have you had any suicidal thoughts? And it's nothing. Like, that just becomes so routine, right? But I've had to do this in my personal life too, and it was just awful. Like, it's way, way different. And I think this is, that's the message that we need to get out there, is that, even if professionals are having fear about the possibility of implanting the idea of suicide in a client's head, imagine what a loved one, a parent or a friend, the fear that they're probably struggling with. And so I think that's why a lot of the prevention and awareness campaigns and messaging is focused on just talking more and trying to dispel that fear. And on that front, it's really great that effort is being put out there more and more. I think there's still lots and lots to do on a systemic level. There's I don't know how controversial we're allowed to get on the podcast, but
this is listened to very, people are listening with a very critical scrutinizing eye. So I'm just joking. Get as controversial as you'd like to. Let's stir up some controversy. In fact,
we're doing it. Yeah. Well, I think it's a kind of a, the change that I'm hearing about a lot, and this is kind of coming from more so a community of people who have survived suicide attempts, are just more and more criticism of like the active rescue style prevention efforts that are so heavily emphasized. And I think more with more and more awareness, especially in the recent years, of just the inequities and the oppression faced particularly by our BIPOC folks, Black, Indigenous, people of color, and just jumping right away to emergency services, can be actually a very different reality for some people, and it could even cause some problems. So we have to kind of hold that and this really tenuous space of we got to do something to help, right? We can't just stand by and do nothing. So it's a bit of a tangent from our question, I know, which is about how do we help a loved one or even ourselves if that's where we're at, if we're thinking of suicide.
Just to point out for the non-clinicians who listen, that pointing out that controversy is sort of an interesting one, right? Then that is something that people, therapists have oftentimes done, at least in the past, is kind of, as soon as the word is mentioned, they get out of their own anxiety. Oftentimes they go, oh my gosh, well, I guess we need to hospitalize, or we need to get some other authorities involved, and we need to, call in the brigade to do something about this, when so much of the time that's actually an overreaction and does more harm than good. Mm-hmm. So there's been a lot of pushback against that from what you're saying, David.
Yeah. And it does, I don't think there's a good solution, right? We can't expect people who are just doing their best, but they haven't done any kind of training in mental health support. They have, they're scared. They want to make sure their loved one is okay and safe. And I think the hospital is kind of the safest place to be, if you're ever in doubt. But there's I think a whole human component that we can incorporate into that process, right? Just the listening and the really kind of just empathizing and being there, right, as a loved one. That is, if we skip over that, like we can actually reinforce, like distrust of the healthcare system, and like just make it actually much less likely for a person to seek out help, even if they have a negative experience. That's something we want to avoid. So ask them how they're doing, ask them clearly and in a direct way. Are you having thoughts of suicide? Have you been thinking about killing yourself? And that way, if they answer yes or no, you know exactly what they're telling you. That's the thing. There's absolutely no research to support the idea that this is going to give someone thoughts or make someone want to actually go through with suicide. Yeah, it's been questioned for decades, and no research has ever supported that conclusion.
Yeah, so I'm assuming, I think a few podcasts ago we talked about supporting family members who are experiencing mental health concerns, and we talked a bit about how they might be deviating from their baseline a bit. They may feel kind of low or down. Would there be some, I guess, signature or types of behaviors to look for someone who might be suicidal? Like
when to ask that question?
When to ask that question, because I'm assuming it's when you're starting to maybe avoid or shut down or not engaging in life, or you don't have that that balance that you typically have.
Mhm.
Who remembers the acronyms? Yeah, I think there's lots of acronyms out there to think about warning signs, but
Yeah.
I don't really love them, to be honest. I think it kind of overcomplicates the issue. Like you were saying, Chris, like, you know this person, hopefully, and is this really weird for them? Is this kind of giving you like a gut feeling that something, like, they're just not well, right?
Yeah.
Mhm.
Can you put enough of those puzzle pieces together to sort of justify that much level of concern?
Mhm.
Certainly, there are bigger puzzle pieces than others, right? So those are helpful to maybe consider, right? If a person's kind of making jokes about death or dying, or kind of vague remarks about not wanting to be around, or just I can't do it anymore, and that's kind of an invitation to start asking some questions. But I mean, there's lots of ways that people deviate from that baseline, like you were saying, Chris.
Mhm.
Yeah. Good.
So as clinicians, we may be using our clinical judgment to kind of assess, based on what we know, what we've seen from past suicidal clients and that sort of thing. But if we're talking about family and friends, then I guess we're talking about just what seems out of place, maybe, or what what things makes it feel like something's off there. Would that be fair to say?
I think so. Yeah. Particularly with family, and I think they're often the first, or family or friends. Like if it's a teen or a youth, I mean, it's often the friends who might be in a better position to kind of hear about these things first before parents or family members, or teachers. Like teachers often are like they might see in that kid's English homework, a really kind of morbid story about death, and that's not normal for that kid. I mean, that's we want to just be making sure that kid has support.
Mhm.
Yeah, sure.
What do you, okay, because I know for as clinicians, if I were to ask and I'd explore kind of what those thoughts of suicide were, are they passive thoughts? Are they wanting to act on those thoughts? I'd look at kind of that intention, and if they have a plan and whatnot. And so there could just be, I just don't actually want to kill myself. I just don't want to be here anymore. Or, you explore that. But how does a family member, if they do find out a loved one does think about suicide,
Mhm.
what would they do? Like, how do they know, is my loved one gonna, take their life tonight? Or are they just wanting, or are they just thinking like they just need to escape? Or how do they gauge what to do? Do they call the police? Do they get them to a hospital? Or is it they just check in on them every now and then? Like, what would we recommend for someone in that way? Which is, any thoughts?
That's a question. Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a tough question, Joanna.
Mhm.
Like it is,
It
because
is.
we're, as clinicians, trained to do these risk assessments, but obviously family members aren't. And David, like you said, often they're so anxious or stressed.
Mhm.
Like we don't want to get it wrong, and they really don't want to get it wrong. And there's anxiety and stress around that. And a lot of my parents with teens, there's been a lot of teenager clients right now with higher suicidal thoughts, and and parents just get quite exceptionally worried, right? So luckily these clients do have clinicians that they connect with, including myself, so we can help coach those parents like on what to do. And that might be an important part for the parents, is for them to reach out for support,
Mhm.
whether it be family doctor, counselor, or a service provider in the community, just to get some guidance on that. I
Yeah.
think it's going to be important. Like, don't fight it alone. I know sometimes it can be stigmatizing. We don't want to talk about these things, but we don't want to do this alone. That's
Yeah.
for sure.
Mhm.
Yeah, I remember, Brooke, you mentioned you talked to a parent of one of your clients, and you talked to her about her reaction to her daughter's, the thoughts and the feelings that she was having, and just trying to coach the mom a bit in terms of being supportive and validating and listening and not freaking out, right? Just saying, okay,
Yeah.
we'll get through this
Yeah.
and we'll get through this together, and we'll make sure that you have the supports in place and whatnot. And it seemed like that was really good advice, for parents to have, right?
Like offering some reassurance, to that person, but also making sure that the parent has someone that they're going to lean on for support, whether it's the other parent or a good friend or someone, because behind closed doors, I mean, this person's going to be freaking out and they need to definitely have their own supports there, right?
Mhm.
So it doesn't seep out onto the family member. Yeah, because when someone's in emotional chaos, we need to stay so grounded and regulated for them. And if they think that you're not going to be able to handle it, then it's going to be a lot harder for them to come to you. If they think that, yeah, that you are going to crash and burn, or if it's going to negatively affect you, or at least in my experience and my clients, that's kind of what I'm hearing.
I think that's just it, Brooke. I mean, if you imagine the absence of that, right, for someone who's in that much despair, right, and I know it's not an easy thing, and I apologize, listeners, for kind of asking you to sort of put yourself in this mindset, but just to kind of briefly entertain that idea that wow, things are so painful for me that I can't even imagine living right now. How badly are you wanting to open up about that? Like, how badly are you wanting to be vulnerable about that? Is it possible that you've been rejected once or twice? Is it possible maybe that you've been kind of ostracized, or that you feel like you don't belong, you don't fit in, people don't want to know, and that you're just a burden on them? I mean, these are the things that we hear, right? And like it seems like such a small thing when we talk about it, to be like, yes, like just kind of ask and listen and be genuine and be there for them. But it's a huge thing when you think about the absence or the opposite of that, right? Because these are people who have, if not outright experienced that, the opposite of that, then they imagine experiencing it all the time, and that fear can be a big barrier. So to feel like, yes, this person wants to talk to me about this, like I have someone who I can talk to about it because I'm scared about it, is a game changer. And it's a huge strength. It's not going to solve the problem. It's not treatment, right? But it is certainly a big step in a good direction, right? And it's one of those huge like protective factors that we often talk about, right? That connection to family or to support of others, that also provides like one of those reasons to live.
Yeah, big time. So I guess you got to kind of gauge what's going on with that individual. Joanna mentioned before that it might just be thoughts like, sometimes I just don't want to be here, versus I'm thinking about this and assessing about this. I have a plan. To trying to gauge that. If it seems like it's in one of those intensive situations where there is a plan or a fixation on it, then that might be maybe one of those situations where you get someone else involved, where you may have to make that call or get some support. Is that safe to say?
I think so. Yeah. And I'm sure we've all kind of had situations, where people have asked us about that, or, we've kind of made those kinds of calls. But yeah, I mean, it's really kind of like, what side do you want to err on? Right. I mean, we, and anyone listening who might have training in the area, like it is a lot of training, like to do like a suicide risk assessment like that,
Yeah.
So I think sometimes we take that for granted, but that's a skill, right? And that's a lot of responsibility, right? And that's not something that, we want to put on a family member, right? You don't want to be making that decision. See, if you're thinking like, what do I want to do? Like, yeah, erring on the side of, okay, well, I have no idea what else to do. I feel like I want to get a professional involved, or I want to kind of like, there's nowhere else for me to go. So I'm going to, take them to the emergency room, or kind of ask them if I can take them, and just kind of hopefully voluntarily get there. But
let's get practical here for a second, David. Let's say that you're a parent and you have a kid, a teenager who is expressing some suicidality, and maybe it's not quite clear if there's really a plan involved, but man, I just wish I was dead, or I wish I wasn't here anymore. And you're not getting much more than that. And you want to actually talk to them about some additional help because you as the parent feel under-equipped. What kind of language does a parent use, do you think, to try to encourage, help the kid see that maybe there's more help that can be obtained and maybe utilized by the kid, you know?
Hopefully it's the kid. Hopefully it's the kid's language. I guess that's a starting point.
Yeah,
Mhm.
sure. I just think it's a scary topic for a parent, or scary thought, you know, and they're afraid of, like, I don't want to push the kid too far and push them away. They also don't want to, you know, blow the thing off and not make a big enough deal of a very important issue.
Yeah.
Mhm. I'm wondering in those moments, I don't have children, but I do work with teenagers and have for a while. And I'm wondering your thoughts for those people, the two of you that have children, or as clinicians, everyone at the table here, to again be a bit more direct about it. And because we know when someone's in emotional chaos or distress, that they're going to have a hard time making decisions and futuristic thinking and being reasonable. So to be able to say, hey, I'm noticing these things, and like, you're having these thoughts, they are suicidal thoughts. Here's what I think we should do.
Yeah.
I think that we should find someone for you to talk to in the community, get you a counselor, this is what to expect, and provide that direction. So it's not a wishy-washy decision. It's more like you're telling them what you've decided and you want them on board.
Yeah. I think it's another one of those things, like there's two extremes that are really unhelpful, right? Which is like, what are you talking about? You know, your life's not that bad, you know, like, yeah, if you want to do that, go ahead. I'll be down here.
You'll be
you know,
fine. Or
yeah. That's, you know, incredibly invalidating, and the kid's never going to talk to you again about that, about their suicidal thoughts. And then there's the other extreme of like it becoming about you. Right? Like you become so stressed out by this that you start to talk about how anxious you are and scared, and you become visibly stressed, and you lose your ability to regulate your emotions and your distress. And the same result, right? Kid's going to think, oh, you know, I don't want to burden mom or dad. You know, I don't want to stress them out, right? And they get that parentification kind of you know, thing going on. So, you know, just try to find a happy middle place. I don't think there's like practical action steps that are really going to sort of land for everyone. But, you know, like if you can genuinely sort of state that, hey, you know, I care about you, I love you, I'm worried about you, you know, and I want to help. Like I want to help, and we can do this together, right? Emphasize that hope, and that you know, recovery is possible, and lots of people, like statistically we know, particularly for kids, 10 to 12%, you know, in that age range are going to think about suicide every year, right? It's not uncommon. So that's the starting point. And then yeah, like you said, Brooke, I like that idea of kind of being directed. I mean, like, hey, let's come up with a plan, you know, let's get you connected with some support, you know, let me help you with that, right?
Mm-hmm.
We don't want to force them into anything, because that sets up a pretty bad dynamic, right?
No, I like that.
I don't know how many times, I don't know if it's happened for you guys too, but where a teenager comes in and they're like, oh, I didn't even know I was coming here until 10 minutes ago. I'm like, first session. I'm like, great. Okay. So we're from here, right? And meanwhile, you pull the parent in and then they have their list. But yeah, they kind of get ambushed on their way in. Like, way to set me up for success here, parents. Thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah, I like that collaborative approach, though. You know, as I love you, I care about you, I want to make sure that you're safe. I'm not sure, you know, exactly what we should do, but let's figure this out together. This is what I think we can do, and let's connect to the proper supports.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because you're leaning into it. You're showing that you're not scared of it, that you can hold it, that you can manage it, that you can be there for them. And again, that can be so stressful as a parent. So just making sure that you as the support person have your own supports to say, oh my gosh, that was so difficult and challenging, and I almost cried and I was shaking and I fumbled my words, and I hope they didn't notice. It's so important to have that person for yourself.
Yeah. True.
Yeah.
Should we explore the next question? What do you think, Ryan?
I thought that was a really interesting question, the second one. And I don't think that gets asked a whole lot.
Yeah.
Like what to do for the self? Like if a listener right now, like if there's a listener feeling suicidal, what to do to help the self?
How do you respond to these suicidal feelings and thoughts if you're experiencing them yourself? Yes. What can you do if you're feeling like you aren't so attached to living right now, which would be kind of the most passive way to look at it, or if you're really contemplating taking your life, what would that, committing suicide, or not committing, committing suicide, attempting, or no, but the terminology of that is important these days, isn't it?
Yeah, it is.
Yes. So we've talked about that a little bit in the past. But yes, completing suicide or attempting, something like that. But committing feels that has too much criminal sort of a component to it. So what would you do? How would we respond to people, or what should our listeners do if they're feeling this way, or anyone who's feeling suicidal?
Share it, say it out loud to someone. Just don't keep it to yourself, especially if those thoughts are becoming more frequent, and it's just share it with someone, right? If you don't feel able to call, go to the hospital or call out to a crisis line or yourself, share with a loved one. Just don't keep that to yourself would be my first thing.
Yeah. Which is so tough though, isn't it, Joe? Because
Oh my gosh,
the term burden came up earlier, and
yeah.
a lot of the clients I've worked with who, or people within the social network who've felt suicidal at times, often feel like an extreme burden. So they don't want to talk to family and friends about it, right? They want to often suffer in silence. So not an easy task there to speak out, right?
No, it's
not. Also so vulnerable.
Yeah.
To actually share that with someone, right?
And if you're not comfortable, if you're kind of just having these thoughts and you're not wanting to go first to a family member, like there are crisis lines or online sources where you can chat rooms, right? And if and there you have to be ready that they're going to gauge and do a risk assessment of your safety. But if there's just troubling thoughts you need to talk to, there are anonymous resources and things you can do. But no, by no means is it easy. It's yeah.
One thing I like to remind clients is that you are not your thoughts, right? You are the space and place where those thoughts occur. So because those thoughts could be very frequent and intensive and negative, it doesn't mean that they're the truth, right? So that's kind of where that mindfulness comes in again, trying to notice those thoughts non-judgmentally or curiosity. But because that first thought that pops into our minds, we cannot control it unless you guys know something I do not. It's the second thought we choose to have is where the growth often takes place, right?
You can't control your first thought, Chris. I feel bad for you.
Right.
Yeah. So it's
the old like don't think about Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer. Oh, sorry, just made you all think of Rudolph. Can't really control that, but yeah, what you do with it next is more manageable.
Yeah, I like to think about like the distress tolerance side of things too, and I think like one of the myths out there about people who are suicidal that I hear often is like, and it's the same reason that people put up a big fuss about spending public money on like suicide prevention barriers or nets under bridges, things like that. They say, well, they're just going to find a way to kill themselves anyway. Why would we waste money on that, right? and there's this lack of understanding that what's actually going on a lot of the times for people who are chronically suicidal, or even just kind of, hey, this is a really awful moment in their life, is that it's a crisis moment, right? They get into a crisis, and it's not a logical place. It's a place that's dictated by distress and despair and desperation. But that's not a permanent thing, right? It kind of comes in a huge wave, but then the wave subsides, right? And a lot of the sort of, systemic work around suicide prevention is around, just kind of making it way, well, easier to ride through the wave of that distress by kind of making it more difficult to actually attempt while the person's in that state of distress, right? Because then it goes by and then it's like, okay, well, yeah, I can live for a little bit longer, right? And that buys time for intervention. That buys for time for that person to kind of, seek help, or, talk to, connections, or for things to kind of turn around in their life.
Yeah.
So being able to tolerate distress in different ways, or even just kind of being able to kind of remind oneself that, that height of distress is not permanent. All they have to do is kind of ride it out, and having the tools and the skills to do that can be really, really important.
True. In Malcolm Gladwell's recent book, he talked a bit about that.
Yeah, I thought about that too. Displacement versus coupling.
That's right. Yeah. And Sylvia Plath's story, and how people often think that, oh, if you take away someone's ability to commit suicide, then there's going to find another way. But that actually doesn't happen. Often they're fixated or focused on one particular method. And if you can help someone or neutralize that, then there's an opportunity there for them to get the support they need. So
yeah. And how dehumanizing is that too? Just to think of someone who's like, their entire state of living is just wanting to die all the time, or kind of looking for ways to die all the time. Like, these are people.
Yeah.
This is a person, right? They want to live. They just don't want to be in agony and suffering all the time.
Yeah. And chances are they experience joy in their day. There's still maybe not a huge wave of happiness that's long lasting, but there's joy, there's laughter, there's humor, there's connection. Those pieces are still in their day. Just thinking about your humanizing comment there, right? Like, they are human. Yeah.
For sure. Yeah. David, we did a book, we read a book together and did a bit of we got to report back on it a couple of weeks ago on Together from Vivek H. Murthy, Surgeon General. So he talked a lot about the impact of loneliness and some really cool initiatives to get people connecting. So yeah, there could be opportunities like that, to connect or to engage in a hobby or a passion, or find some meaning and purpose.
Yeah. There's a speaker, a pretty well-known speaker by the name of Kevin Hines, who is best known for being a survivor of jumping from the Golden Gate Bridge in San Francisco. And that was when he was, I think, in his early 20s, and he says that was, I don't know, 15 or 16 years ago, something like that. But he lived, right, which is quite rare from that particular event. But there's a interview that I watched of him, and the one thing always stands out, which is he's kind of recounting that day, and he says, well, I went down there, I got to the bridge, and I sort of paced around back and forth, and I thought about it. I think it was like for hours. Like he was there for a while, right? And he said nobody cared. He was just kind of like on the railing. Nobody cared. A German couple came up and asked if he could take their picture. I think was the extent of the human interaction he got. And then at that point, he's like, just nobody cares. It's not worth it. So imagine though, if someone had come along and asked him like, hey, are you okay? Like, really, I'm a little worried about you. Like, I don't know. It may not have solved, the very complicated and real issues that he was going through that were driving those thoughts of suicide, but hey, for that day, maybe he would not have made that jump.
Yeah, for sure. David, are adolescents, are they more susceptible to feeling suicidal? Obviously could be a very tumultuous time, increase in neurons, lack of pathways, very emotional, lots of intensive thoughts,
Higher impulsivity,
higher focus on social interactions. Like, what do you know what the data is on that? Not to put you on the spot.
Yeah, I have difficulty with the question, Chris. I think maybe the question might be flawed. I don't know for sure. Like I can give you statistics on like the groups that are sort of most represented among suicide deaths.
Yeah.
But I
Mhm.
don't think that tells the full picture of the story, right? Because it tells us that white middle-aged men die are the highest risk group first, exactly, right? And
That's me. That's my group.
yeah, I'm with you.
Chris's
Yeah.
group too. Chris is getting a little older.
Oh, yeah.
Yep.
So I think, but it could throw you another statistic that might make you think, well, it is kids, right? Suicide is the second leading cause of death for people under the age of 24. So who is it, right? It's all relative. I think we have a tough time with adolescents and kids. Obviously we have a tough time looking at that rationally and logically because they're young people, like they're kids, like the idea of like that lost potential, like is just really hard for us to sit with, right? I think the thing that I would want listeners to really understand is that there is no group that does not experience this, right? There is no group. Like it affects people of all ages, socioeconomic statuses. Like it doesn't matter if you're rich or you're poor, or you're white or you're a person of color, anything, and it's so complicated. Like we can't ever kind of point to one thing that as a cause, because it's often many things.
Yeah. No, well said. Yeah, for sure.
And I think that's important too, because I think there could be a lot of shame that some people feel if they were to admit that they feel feel like attempting suicide. And I think it's just important, whether for listeners or to be able to tell loved ones, like wherever you're at, for whatever reason, I think they're afraid of people being like, well, why are you feeling that way? You got it all. Or, but whatever you feel is okay. And wherever you're at, like, it's just, we want to know. And it's, whatever led up to that point or whatever's contributing to it, we want to help you with that. We want to kind of help you with whatever's troubling you. But I feel like there's shame or there's stigma around it that maybe prevent people from reaching out, or judgment they're worried about. So we're trying to work on that with the mental health world, but it's I think it's a bit of a battle.
Yeah, there is one issue that I think is really kind of weighs on this, that's often unspoken about here in Canada, at least anyway. I don't know, Ryan, if you have a different story to tell on this, but firearms, right? Having firearms in the home is a huge risk factor. Like that is if we had to pick one thing, like if public prevention efforts focused on one thing, like I think firearm safety and what to do with firearms when there's a suicidal person in the home is one of those things. We don't talk about it often up here in Canada because I think just the cultural discussion and sort of perspective on firearms is quite a bit different. But I don't know, Ryan, like what comes up for you on that one?
Oh, I've heard that certainly mentioned here as far as, other ways to take that risk. Oftentimes suicidality is such an impulsive thing. And if you've got the means sitting right next to you on your, bedside table, that's going to increase that risk quite a bit. And certainly here, yeah, absolutely. Of course, gun ownership and our Second Amendment stuff, the right to bear arms is a hotly contested issue. But I mean, and it's not only, there's so many people with guns here that accidental death by gunfire is a major cause of death here as well. There's guns everywhere. So, and certainly for suicidality, I think that's something definitely to take into consideration. I think we could also talk about, maybe if we're going to spread around some controversy, maybe we should throw some shade on big pharma as well. And, because a lot of suicide attempts are from medications, and there's a whole lot of, some would say overprescription of some lethal medications down here as well, that people, it's not too hard to get your hands on some of that.
Well, if you're like struggling heavily with an opioid addiction, and all you have to do is, like the 5 or 6, pharmacists or doctors or whatever in your area who have no qualms about sort of prescribing. It's a good thing that's been brought into sharper focus recently. And I know yeah, it often is like, and that's where often numbers are tough to kind of rely on too, because we sometimes don't know, like, well, was this death accidental or not?
Right.
But, I mean, like, there's so many. It's so complex.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Go ahead, Ryan. Yeah.
Kind of tangential, but something that actually came up earlier this week. I live in Pasadena, and there's a somewhat famous bridge here, the Colorado Street Bridge, that is not as famous as the Golden Gate Bridge, but in Southern California, this Colorado Street Bridge is known as Suicide Bridge, and that's just because it's way too often the final leap of a lot of people, and down here several years ago, if I'm not mistaken, the local news service down here decided to stop talking about the folks who had completed suicide off that bridge because of the concerns of there was kind of a lot of them, like monthly, and just the thought of like that might spur copycats, or
Contagion.
again, what's that?
The contagion effect.
The contagion effect, yeah. So I just find that kind of an interesting thing of, like, we're talking before about how we shouldn't be shy about asking people right to their face, hey, are you feeling suicidal? But then also there are other measures about, well, maybe we shouldn't be talking as loudly about how many people are committing or completing suicide and even attempting on a regular basis.
Yeah. I mean, that's another one of those like rock and a hard place kind of issues, right? There's another, so I think the contagion effect is pretty well known, and research does back it up. So I mean, that there's a reason you hear about police incidents on bridges instead of there's a jumper on the bridge. So, but there's I think there's a equivalently important effect, and it happens to have a much funner name, which is called the Papageno Effect. And it's based, I think the name comes from an Italian opera. I don't follow opera. I don't really know much about that part of it all, but I believe the opera is about, someone who, was kind of leaning in that direction of kind of a copycat behavior, but then, didn't. It ended up being a happy ending. So the Papageno effect actually describes when media coverage is positive, when it's done well, when it sort of follows good guidelines that have been sort of scientifically backed up, and emphasizes hope and recovery, and provides greater access to like things like crisis lines and other kinds of services, suicide rates go down. So it's the total opposite effect of the contagion effect. So I think the conclusion we come to is like, well, it's not whether or not we talk about it, it's how we talk about it, right? So if you see a newspaper article that's like this big sensational headline, so-and-so celebrity tries to hang themselves, but then, it's sharing details of methods, and it's really sensationalizing and making it all about, oversimplifying and just kind of, then we get people identifying with that person's suffering and all this, then yeah, we do see suicide rates go up. We also see help-seeking behaviors go up, which is important to note. But if the media source is doing their job and following the very well advertised and well marketed suicide reporting guidelines that are available in many organizations, the American Association of Suicidology makes these very available, as well as the Canadian Association of Suicide Prevention. I mean, we could do that. That's an easy change, but it's fewer clicks probably.
I think it's, I don't know, Chris, you've talked about that. If there's been big deaths in the pop culture, that clients might come in and be having a harder time with that, right? Or I think it's helpful when mental health is talked about more, and people are realizing that celebrities or people in the limelight, they can have their struggles too, and it's not this sought after life and everyone's good and they had it all. So I think the more that people are able to share struggles, and it's not idealizing this life for, well, if they couldn't do it, then I can't, and trying to just stop that effect from happening. Or just in general, if, I don't know. Yeah, I think there's so many different variables.
Yeah, for sure.
Keep throwing new angles onto this. It's going to be tough to wind it down.
Yeah, no kidding. Is that time to wind it down? Because I had another question, but I
We got
I have no
time
idea.
for another question. We got another time.
You're here forever, David.
Yeah, this is typically how it goes though. It's like, beep,
Okay.
beep,
Yeah.
beep, beep. Yeah.
this might be there's a lot of differences here in terms of how we do things up here in Vancouver area and how I think things work down this south of the border. But for some clients, they go into our mental health facilities and they get an assessment, and usually within 24 hours or 48 hours, they're released. In some circumstances, it seems like they're very intensive situations, and and they're discharged often against the family's wishes because they feel very powerless. My understanding is in maybe other places like down south, there's mental health programs, more longer term programs, for instance, that could offer a bit more stability. Any research out there in regard to what would be best for someone who is experiencing suicidal thoughts or feelings? Is it best to get discharged, back into the community, or would it be better to, in Vancouver, if we had a program that we could refer clients to that could be a little more supportive?
You guys don't have long-term facilities like a psych hospital, or
No.
There are
You and
psych
like,
units, yeah.
Units,
But
but
the
units
units-
are short term.
Yeah, so there was a big decision years ago to decentralize. We had a big mental health hospital called Riverview, and then they decided to maybe invest that money more in the community supports. So we have mental health units in hospitals, but it's just that often.
They forgot the second half of that. They defunded the hospitals, and then they forgot to add the funding into the community.
Yeah.
Well, forgot is probably being generous, but yeah, again, it's just like, how it's a reality, that the services are underfunded, probably everywhere, right? Unless you have, that's maybe where, the advantage of being well resourced and so forth can really be a protective factor. But sometimes I think it feels, particularly for families who, have a loved one who is kind of like a more complex case. They've got lots of different intersecting, diagnoses or kind of issues going on, and they're kind of in and out of the hospital, in and out of different programs. There's no kind of like person, like there's no like one person, that's kind of there throughout. We're just kind of doing the best we can in this really fragmented and underfunded system. I guess my response to your initial question, Chris, was like, I don't know. I think a lot about Marsha Linehan's story. So Marsha Linehan is the fairy godmother of dialectical behavior therapy, which is a very, very kind of well-known and well-regarded, empirically supported form of cognitive behavior therapy. That kind of really kind of hones in on this dialectic, right? This sort of, complicated, sort of contradictory relationship between acceptance and change. I know you know all of that, but I don't want to just kind of throw names of stuff out there without any context.
That's good. Ryan would have asked you, so
yeah.
good.
Yes.
So,
Yeah, it's good.
Marsha, Dr. Linehan she actually published a book recently. It was all about her sort of personal story, but one like really kind of like big conclusion in there is like, going to the hospital for her was like a personal hell, and it made things worse. So she kind of made it her mission to kind of fund and kind of look into research about like, hey, what actually happens to people when they're hospitalized after a suicidal crisis, right? And it's pretty disappointing, right? The research that's coming out, it's worrisome that, oftentimes it's within that sort of post-hospitalization or post-release period that people are actually at a higher risk So I mean, to me, that just points out, like, you know, like it's the way in which this is happening. Like it's the dehumanization, it's the kind of, you know, taking agency away from people. It's, you know, trying to force treatment that, you know, it's not a long-term solution. It maybe gets a person through a crisis, and that's important, right? But if that's not followed up with like, you know, effective and thoughtful and humane treatment and care, like it's the person, you know, they're no better off, and they may feel like, well, that didn't work, so, you know, that's not a hopeful message, I guess.
No, but you
It's kind of
answered
like
my-
I feel like
It's a
we have to
realistic
talk
one.
about these two pieces, right? There's the getting through a
Yeah.
crisis piece, and then there's the, hey, let's work on it piece. And you know, I think that let's work on it piece, you know, often the healthcare system is just playing catch up, right? They're trying to pull people out of the river, you know, and you know, and then they see there's another person floating down the river, and they rush to pull that one out, and there's not really much resources or ability to kind of really help people kind of recover. So that's where I think, you know, if there was a message, like let's kind of, you know, if I'm a family member and I'm kind of wanting to know what can I do, it's like you really try to help that person really connect with that recovery process, that treatment process, and you know, encourage and you know, keep at it, because it can sometimes be a bit of a shopping process, and there can be obstacles. A person
Yeah.
might need some encouragement.
Ryan, what's it like down in Pasadena?
As far as the long-term treatment for this, I mean, a lot of times in the States, as it is in our capitalistic society, it's a lot better if you have money. So there are certainly there are programs, and I used to work at a private psychiatric hospital where there were people who were there for the holds, which here if someone is suicidal and someone can put them on a hold, a medical doctor, psychologist can put them on a hold for 72 hours. So they're there against their will, involuntarily, and really can't leave. They'll be on a locked unit for a period of time, if that's what they deem they need to do in order to protect them, to keep them from taking their life. And that can even be extended another 72 hours, and then going to a judge, you could get them there for another 14 days or 30 days. So these sort of periods of time that people can be kept against their will. But there are also treatment facilities for people who want to get that treatment. But again, it takes either great insurance or a lot of private funding for that. And there are some facilities out there, and we see these facilities every time we go to the symposium, like Austin Riggs and a few of these other places where people can go for long-term treatment. And it's, you know, quite expensive, but they're getting a lot of one-on-one care and group care, and getting some good treatment for that. On the other end of that's kind of the upper end of the scale, you know, with people who have the money or the great insurance. On the other end of the spectrum, people who have no money and yet are pretty severely mentally ill, there are state-funded hospitals that people kind of go and are committed to. That means like they're a ward of the court, like the state kind of says, we'll take care of you. And those don't have a great reputation. So it's for everyone kind of in the middle of that bell curve, it's intensive outpatient programs, and a lot of these DBT groups that you were talking about, and psychotherapy that people can engage in if they can find them nearby, and help get the help they need, you know?
Yeah. So up here we do have private treatment, but it's only for addictions. There's private addiction centers, but nothing for private mental health.
Is there
Nothing
no
for
like eating
bipolar.
disorder?
Oh, I guess so.
clinics,
Yeah.
stuff like that?
Yeah. There are a few eating disorder ones, residential programs.
And it's
Yeah.
hard
And
to,
very
yeah, there's a
very
lot of,
few intensive day programs.
yeah.
I think we have an ayahuasca treatment center somewhere in the like Gulf Islands somewhere.
Do we now?
I do.
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah,
Also
like
very
Salt
expensive.
Springs. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a whole other topic there for.
There's your next
yeah.
ambush. Yes.
Yeah.
Here we go. Here we go. Well, guys, I've learned a lot already. David, you've been very helpful.
I hope it's not too much of a downer. Yeah, I mean, but I hope I can talk about this with a smile on my face, and I hope that's kind of the spirit that people can listen to it too. Is that be able to just normalize the conversation a bit more.
So important. Thank you for doing that. Yeah.
Yes, thank you for doing that. Thank you for talking about suicide with us. We'll say the word loud and clear. And I'll put this in the link, but I'll say it to folks out loud here too. If you are someone who is struggling with suicidal thoughts, there are these nice free hotlines that are available. In the States, the number for that is 1-800-237-TALK. And in Canada, the number I just found, I just Googled, is 1-833-456-4566. And these are numbers that are available 24/7 to talk and to get some support if you're feeling alone, if you're struggling, having some of these thoughts and feeling like you're not safe. These are people who can talk to you and provide a personal connection and maybe point you towards some resources. So that's the whole function of that. So, David, you were an ambush I wasn't expecting, and I'm really glad you came because I would not have had as much information as you shared with us tonight. Thank you.
My pleasure. Thanks so much, everyone.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Thanks for coming, David.
Yes. So I will wrap us up here and say thanks for listening, everybody. Like and subscribe on Apple, Google, Podbean, Audible, Spotify, Stitcher, or YouTube. Send your questions to info@mentalhealthbootcamp.com. Visit us on Facebook or Instagram. Tell a friend or two, and have a good night. Bye, everybody.
Bye, everyone.
Bye, everybody.
Doodles.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.